So we were discussing the parallels between like them running a successful, existent, historically established UBI program, and then these flashy projects that show up with a shiny ball and say like we are the future of the internet and we're the future of UBI. And so we've been spending the days, conversations, really drawing a lot of parallels between what's being built, what's been built, and like what's going to be built. And so I invited you here from Radworks, which I'll let you introduce Radworks yourself. But you guys are really focused on the future of the internet. And so I want us to just discuss that. I recently was at the United Nations Internet Governance Forum, and they kept throwing around these terms like meaningful connectivity and terms like the internet we want and what is the internet in 20 years, like all of these things. And so I wanted to bring all that BS and just like come and say, okay, from the actual hacker space, what are the answers to these questions? Like, they're not ever going to, from a policy side of things, ever define meaningful connectivity, but I think that our community is actively trying to. So I'd love for you to introduce Radical, and then, yeah, like, let's get off running on some of this. So.
Okay, I love it. So hi, I'm Abbey. So at Radworks, I run our governance team, but I've been with the project through many evolutions. Radworks was once known as the Radical DAO, which was once known as Radical, which was once known as OS Coin. And
OS Coin.
Throughout all of those evolutions, the common thread has been that funding FOSS to cultivate internet freedom is the way, it is the only way. And so that is basically kind of you could say the mantra behind the project. So Radworks is the current evolution and most recent evolution of the project. What it is, in a very pithy one-line statement, is that it's a networked organization that funds new censorship-resistant permissionless technologies to cultivate internet freedom. Two of those being Radical, which is the decentralized code collaboration stack built on top of Git that everybody knows and loves, and Drips, which is our Ethereum-based streaming protocol for funding open source developers. So both of these technologies together represent, we think, two very important pieces of like the new internet stack, and we believe will help us cultivate the growth, the support, the funding of more and new censorship-resistant permissionless technologies. So that's kind of like the TLDR on Radworks. It's governed by a decentralized governance system that's on-chain. And another thing is, we just are funding new technologies, not only Radical and Drips, but we have a grants program, and we actually just announced yesterday, we just funded $1 million of our treasury that we're streaming to all of our open source dependencies within our ecosystem, which is kind of like, a very big moment and kind of gives you a little bit of taste of like where Radworks is and what it's trying to do. So cultivating internet freedom through funding free and open source software. Yeah,
I mean, like, let's just zoom in on that a little bit because so for myself, I'm coming from a project called Internet Alliance that I founded because weaponized internet shutdowns became like a really big part of my reality suddenly, like 2 years ago. And then I saw, when I was getting into it, I saw that this was actually a problem that's going to be coming to the West in just a short amount of time. And there's these ideas of, everyone understands like internet shutdowns. This is an idea that across the globe people are like, no, the internet shouldn't be shut down. The internet should be on. This is a well accepted reality. However, there's things that people don't quite realize about internet control, and this is like where things like Radical come into play. Where it's like you can't go on GitHub if you are an Iranian developer. You can't go on GitHub depending on the time of year if you're a Syrian developer. These are communities that have millions of people. They have people online. They have highly technical, talented communities, and just because of political policy and different like government governance, there's just they're excluded. And so this is really in tandem with like those same governments also shut down populations from the internet. And so I'm really curious, and I'd love for you to take this question when you guys when you're coming from a place where you've already built something as impressive as Radical, like when you're talking about funding the future of the internet development, like what are you looking for out there, and what is something that inspires you? Because you guys are coming from such an already impressive like standard being set.
Well, first, I will say that the journey to radical, being something as widely adopted as GitLab or GitHub is still, we have a long journey ahead of us, but the foundations are there, because I think that when you're looking at these types of technologies, again, these like censorship resistant, permissionless technologies, it is a longer and different life cycle than I think other like VCs funded tech, right? And so first, I would say that the journey has not ended for Radical and for Drip specifically, and it's all about securing, their long-term resilience and developing technology that can be used by anybody forever. You know what I mean? So it's creating something that lasts beyond us, I think, which is like one interesting point of how funding these types of technologies is different than funding other technologies. Like Radworks isn't an accelerator, you know what I mean? And it's kind of like trying to also restructure the funding paradigms that go into funding free and open source software in general. But then what are we excited about? I mean, first I just want to agree and like double click on this concept of internet shutdowns and other internet censorship becoming way more of a reality for the Western world. More like as time accelerates, as geopolitical conflicts intensify, I think more and more we will start recognizing how and facing the control of like state-censored media, of state-censored internet, and we won't realize that we need the tech that we're trying to build now until we're in the middle of it. And so I see, and I think we all are kind of starting to feel the undertidings of like a very fractionalized internet that is actually like very scary when you think about it in theory, because access to an internet is a human right. Code is speech. Your digital rights are just as important as your physical rights, and I don't think that there's like enough people like carrying that flag for that in general. So for us, I think this is why we also reconstructed our purpose to be about censorship resistant and permissionless technologies, and that we believe that actually what we've built with Radworks, this decentralized governed community governing an on-chain treasury, is actually like a really awesome like first order organization for funding censorship resistant technology specifically, because we can not only embed capture resistance in the technology and in the social conditions and being able to grow an ecosystem, but you also embed capture resistant in the source of funding, right? Yeah. So I think that this is like a long-winded answer.
Capture resistant in the source of funding.
Yeah, because I think right now open source really thrives off of a strong corporate sponsorship model.
Yeah.
So anytime, and the corporate sponsorship, aka big tech corporate sponsorship, is an incredibly like nation state aligned sector of tech, right? Yeah. So
you can see this by who even the crypto space cares about when they have internet shutdowns. Like if you look at, or like any kind of conflict, if you look at how crypto galvanized itself towards Ukraine, it was immediate. And there's a lot of Ukrainian developers and there's a lot of people in the space, right? But there's also a sign off from like the Western world that says like, do whatever you need to do. If you want to give those people crypto, give those people crypto. We do not care. We need to get those people money. And there's like this direction where I see the crypto world, which likes to say that it's anti-authoritarian, it's stateless, it's a network state of like-minded individuals. But it's really like if you look at what we build and what we focus on, it's always Western focused for the most part. It is like Western focused, checked off like community projects or focusing on the finances they'll let us work on and these types of things.
Or only solving problems that sector is experiencing at that time, and not recognizing that different parts of the world, like the global south, Africa, have completely different needs technologically and socially and politically. And so that paired with the fact that private capital is like so intertwined with nation state interests, and so this fragmented
Fragmentation,
that's the word, of the internet will be so closely correlated to geopolitical conflict, and I don't think that we realize or understand like how much of our digital social experience is tied to big tech and brokered by big tech, and how much of it would be rate limited and controlled the minute that nation states start wielding the power that they already have. We just haven't seen them really act on it yet.
Yeah, I think this is a great segue into understanding this next part, which is, I think, a simple yes or no answer, because what you're describing, and we talk about the funding of our space and why we see these basically like ported business models, like business models that worked in Web 2, getting funded to build a Web 3 version of them. It's VC interest, it's VC focus, right? So we want to see a better, more established, decentralized internet built. And we're talking about what does the internet look like in 20 years. But let's pause here, and yes or no, if the American government in 1989 knew that giving the internet and just giving it to people would turn into what we have today with this hyper-connected, globally aware, like hive mind tree of information, do you think that they would have given internet to everyone?
No.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
No.
I mean, it's like the same. You can look at AI as like a perfect example, right? The way that the government is trying to rate limit AI. And one could argue that the impact of AI is potentially, we're accelerating exponentially in technology, and so AI being introduced at the scale that it is potentially could be seen as like on a different scale than like the internet being introduced when it was. However, the reaction is the same, and this is why in the early days of the internet, first of all, the internet spawned, from DARPA, right?
Yeah, it was literally
like,
DARPA.
and it spawned, and I think it took on
Vint Cerf,
the shape. And for a long time, the government was fighting. I've just been doing a lot of research into like the old hackers, so hacker culture back in the 80s and 90s. And found out that the guy who, one of the people who founded the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, actually founded it because he was arrested by the Secret Service for contributing content to a like Dungeons and Dragons tabletop role-playing game about hacking. And the government saw it as a national security threat because it was basically a guide on how to hack the government, and arrested him and then took the book and like destroyed the master copy of the book. And that was what like spawned the EFF, which was the most insane story I've heard in my life, but speaks to the way that the government has always reacted to something that they can't control. And now I think that specifically like the US government is deeply intertwined and in bed with big tech in a lot of ways. Big tech is also kind of retaining its agency in a lot of ways, but regardless, our day-to-day interactions are entirely brokered by a few
ISP,
U.S.-tied national corporations, and that's a global effect. And that reliance and that dependence on centralized alternatives, for me personally, is inherently unsustainable. For the crypto industry, I think is incredibly unsustainable, thinking of the fact that we want to build systems that exist outside of our kind of like centralized paradigm. So this is why I think crypto should kind of care about this more than they
start funding things that aren't these traditional business models. And like,
totally.
And we're coming from internet infrastructure. Like some of the stuff that I'm working on right now for our research pilots has been even just understanding what it takes to do the last mile. And we talk about the last mile a lot in everything that we talk about in crypto. But we talk about the last mile as if it is like a mile that needs to be walked. And one of the things we're looking into is like how much money is lost inside of a region that's experiencing an internet shutdown or an internet slowdown, which is specifically becoming the bigger weapon, the more sophisticated weapon by a lot of nation states, isn't to shut the people off on the internet, it's just to fucking rate limit it so hard that you have no real meaningful connection. And so something that we've been looking into is that on this topic of nation states controlling things, the formulas used to determine how much money is lost inside of an internet shutdown are controlled by these same nation states. And they're all entirely done on a nation-state level, like in international state actors. If you want to know how much money was lost in Ethiopia, in Sudan, in Iran, whatever, it's always based off of the whole country, and there's no way to adapt or to input your regional GDP and understanding your community's impact. But this is the way that internet shutdowns are actually used. They're used against small communities inside of nation states. And there's a reason we don't see actual data models being produced and being utilized. And CEPESA, the people who make the most utilized formula, it's a joke. There are a bunch of think tankers in East Africa, and it's just a joke. But this is stuff that they don't want to have this information be more public, because this would allow for actual action and solutions to be designed around what it means to, be shut down from the internet. And I just wanted to give this up for you to talk on and discuss is when you see projects that you're looking to fund from Radworks and you're seeing the potential impacts they're having. Do you guys have a charter, I guess, that you kind of guide with around this?
Yeah, I think the charter is evolving right now, with the focus currently being on supporting the adoption of Radical and Drip specifically. So, for example, I said earlier that Radworks just approved spending of 1 million of our treasury to our critical open source dependencies. We're doing that with drips, which is probably the best tool to
maybe
fund your
just explain
right
drips
now.
to the folks back home.
So Drips is basically a streaming protocol based on Ethereum that lets you stream any digital currency to any builder that you want. And you can do that via lists. So I can stream a certain amount of money to a list that is weighted, that sends X% to this person, Y% to this person, Z% to this person, and so on. What's cool about this is that you can just stream to any, this is really for funding open source builders right now. You can fund to any GitHub repo. Or Radical repo at some point, but any GitHub repo, and that maintainer can claim the money via drips. So with our dependencies, we funded projects like Ether.js. I think Foundry was up there. Nick Johnson was maintaining this open source package and got some money, Nick Johnson from ENS. And so it just kind of contextualizes what we think should be the new funding paradigm for FOSS in general, which is that people should just commit to streaming 1% of their treasury, 1% of their profits to their dependencies, to take all of this capital and redistribute it down the stack, which I think is actually our responsibility as people who work in magic internet money. So we love that, and that's Drips, right? Which I think is an incredibly important. I think a resilient crypto ecosystem is equivalent and requires a well-funded open source ecosystem as a whole.
Yes,
and that's a really important part of this.
We just had Lane Reddick on here a couple of sessions ago, just as I wanted him to discuss the history of him trying to submit an EIP for public goods funding and how dramatic and shitty it was. And what the conclusion that we came to at the end of it was that in 2019, the space wasn't mature enough to understand formats for how to stream income to people who are core developers and core builders and actually creating impactful stuff and creating sustainable ecosystems. So I really love the idea of streaming tokens to people because of Patreon exists and it's an established business model, but the idea that this person is just a builder and they're not giving you a Photoshop template file or something that people do on Patreon. This is more this person is a core developer, and these treasuries that exist are giving a quarter, a percentage of this money directly to this person who's building stuff, which is a much more streamlined, I think, version than what Gitcoin is trying to do, where it is kind of instance interaction. It's singular interactions that you have with Gitcoin that in order to get new money and prove your worth, prove that you can solve a bounty, and then you get more bounties. This isn't a thing that serious established wealth good builders are going to interact with. So I love that.
Well, also the model just like recognizes the existing interdependencies and funds them appropriately. So it's not saying I have to submit myself to a grant round or submit a grant to receive funding for this work, or I mean even retroactively. I think that this point is just saying like software dependencies are a real interdependency. We already rely on dozens of dependencies that fall down the stack that are all maintained by random people around the world. And open source sustainability has always been a problem, and now corporate sponsorship has become like the de facto solution, and we think that we can just do better. And I think that like now people in the crypto industry have the ability to change the paradigm, make funding FOSS a standard across all, and just have it be something that's happening in the background de facto as the status quo versus something that we have to do differently about what we do. We should just be doing this instinctually, you know what I mean? And I think that that's kind of the behavior and the cultural norm that I think Radworks is trying to seed right now with its partnership with Drips.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the term would be, because like I really want there to be like a good simple term like yassification for what it, because I think you're also fossification is great actually. And I think what you're describing is, I think there's a lot of people in this space that started off trying to build some of these tools, and you're describing like VC interests and centralized nation state interests aligning with VC interests. And we see things like WorldCoin getting funded with $100 million inside of a bear market, and it's clearly based off of nation-state interest, identity farming for these future migratory populations. And so this is where I think you could start off and say like, yeah, we wanted to build the UBI, and then this is like, good, fossification, yeah, that's a good thing. And then there's this encroaching, I think, centralization, this encroaching narrative that gets pushed around in these teams, and these teams like wake up a year later and look nothing like what they originally set out to do.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Which is like also like it's just kind of like the nature of the system in that like capital seeks to accumulate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In accumulation one seeks to capture. And so I think you are already seeing like parts of the crypto ecosystem being captured, whether that be by private funding or consolidation into DAOs. And I'm not saying that that's not a natural thing that should just be resisted entirely. I don't think everything should just be decentralized. I think what we need to recognize is that if we truly believe in the ideological paradigms of crypto, and not just crypto, like peer-to-peer in general, and like the agency of being able to interact freely on the internet equally as humans, then we need to think and do more to support the resilience of the ecosystem from every layer of the stack and build that up and intentionally resist like attempts at accumulation and at capture.
Resist. I think the intentional resistance is the hardest part for people because of the incentive models around these accumulators. They show up and they say like, here's an airdrop, or here's our business model, our plan, and we're gonna become a partnership. Because like, I mean, people just want to like create partnerships all the time, and then they have this ecosystem of partnerships with nothing actually being built, nothing being done. And so I feel like that focus changes or gets lost with all of this desire to create more partnerships, more power.
Yeah, but like for example, if VCs want to keep investing in the space, they can. Yeah. But they should maybe also be streaming like 1% of their LP funds to FOSS as well, because they're like extracting from a space.
Where's their
that
skin in the game?
Where is their skin in the game? That's a great question.
They're like, oh, here's money. That's our skin in the game, and it's like, but
well,
what?
Their money is like going into. They take their LP's money and then they invest. It's kind of this like embrace, embrace, extend, extinguish. This was like a phrase used by Microsoft and was actually surfaced in a lot of like the legal tidings that Microsoft faced for like the anti-monopoly stuff that they had to go through. And it was a phrase that was used to represent how Microsoft would embrace open source ecosystems, extend them, and then in that process of extending them with the capital, extinguish them completely. Yeah. And so it was seen as this kind of, like eat their lunch vibes, and they tried to turn it as being like, no, this is just what happens regardless. Yeah. I think you also see that now. I think that there's been like a lot of VC funded like open source projects that embrace, a standard that's happening in the space, extend it with all of their SF-funded capital, and then in that process extinguish like some sort of like the biodiversity of that like open source ecosystem as a whole.
The actual reach of the ecosystem.
Totally, and you can't fault them as well because they're just deploying their capital in an effort to make as much capital as they can, right? And they are supporting the space, and I think that there's actually like a lot of really awesome embracing and extending being done. I just don't think that we've seen the space is too early to see how things can be extinguished, and so I think that we need to kind of like ultimately really basically challenge and force people to also be intentional about how they're supporting the resilience of the space, and basically just like ask people to do better.
That's where my next question is headed, is that I think we've talked a lot today about the resiliency of like the space when it comes to protocols, when it comes to like social maturity around like EPIs and like what actually builds and sustains Ethereum and other ecosystems that are in parallel. But one of the things that I don't think we talk about is that strategy of extend and extinguish is been used on people itself. Like people in that were given jobs for outrageous bloated incomes at Facebook, at Google, and all of that capital went into essentially doing that same colonization of potential ideas. Like we want those ideas to be made in-house. We don't want those ideas to be made elsewhere and take away our market share. And one of the things I'm really excited for, and I'd love to hear from your perspective as someone who is looking for new people to join the space or looking for people to utilize drips, is like when do we think that there's like a disillusioned new freshman class of developers that are coming out, like now that everyone got fired during the pandemic from Facebook and Google, and like there's this, that was the first big economic crash inside of this established tech world. And so I'm hopeful that there is this population of builders there, right, who aren't in Web3 and they aren't in anything because they're just talented and young and don't have any job prospects. But I'm kind of hoping that we can siphon off that potential.
I think we are. I think a lot of them are going into AI, to be honest, because which is another thing. But I really do think that there is not only a new segment of new developers and new builders and new creators, but there's kind of also a new a new mindset about what to build. I think that in the same breath of all of this collapse of the economic system, not just in crypto, and all these layoffs and everything, we also saw this like new drive and push towards, like, for example, like a lot of decentralized social media alternatives with Farcaster and Blue Sky. And I saw
they're like getting it a little bit.
No, so it was like there was like this huge, economic crash, and then in the same, phase, there was also like this like new mainstream interest in like these decentralized platform adjacent technologies, and I thought that was really cool because I think that speaks to the mindset of people who are being promised, embraced, and extended, and then their careers kind of extinguished as people saying, okay, well, maybe things should be different now. And we're seeing this, it's still happening. It just happened with Bandcamp, for example. Bandcamp was sold at the peak, sold to somebody else, and then that person
Dice, I think, or somebody like that.
Laid off like a majority of the population. And I think that that's going to continue happening for a little bit. But I think this is when we can start building better things.
What you're saying is that the crypto ecosystem, or the internet infrastructure ecosystem of people like us, needs to start throwing conferences for people who have been laid off. Admittance, you have to have been laid off recently by a tech company. I think this is where we get them. Treat them nice. It's like a real, like, you're stealing someone's girlfriend type thing. Like, treat them better than they've ever been treated before. We got muffins in the morning. We've got eggs Benedict for brunch. This is how we get them.
Mimosas.
Give them
work for crypto.
Like they're just spoiled children that got lost inside of the Google brunches. So we have to like remember this. Remember what you had. But I think with like our last couple of seconds here, I think I would just want to hear your take on this question. I think we've been asking a lot of people. It just comes from the UN circles, and I'm trying to bring it into the crypto space because I think that we're the people who are better situated to actually answer this question. But what does it mean to you for people to be meaningfully connected?
this meaningful connection is like a really interesting thing. I think meaningful connection is the ability to connect freely from anywhere, no matter what, right? And so I think meaningful connection is also like free connection, and not free as in like free beer, like the Foss terms, but like free as in freedom.
Yeah.
And so I think meaningful...
Free as in freedom?
Free
as in freedom!
I think that, meaningful connection is definitely equitable, diversified access to communication. And I think that's what's meaningful. So I think it's equivalent in a way.
Yeah, and I know you guys are out here funding meaningful projects to achieve meaningful connectivity. So I want to thank you for coming by and, being cool and shit.
Cool. You too. Thanks.
Thanks. Just one more with Bogdan here. We have one more. Do.
Hello.
All right. And our final person of the day, morning, afternoon experience. Bogdan, how do you say your last name? I'm not going to do this.
Dumitru.
Bogdan Dumitru from Romania.
Indeed. From Celtic
Romania,
Eucharist.
highest percentage of mathematicians per population capita anywhere in the world. And highest number of Nobel Prizes in mathematics.
Really?
I believe you guys hold the number. Yeah, it's Romania.
Interesting. I did have a colleague in high school which got the gold in mathematics like for 5 years in a row, from the 8th grade to the 12th grade. Like, just.
What's he doing now?
She is a quant on Wall Street. That's where
what a
math Olympiads
sellout.
go to die.
What a sellout. She's doing very well.
Very well.
Okay, well, let's. Speaking of quants and Wall Street and the world of finance, let's do a little intro for Bogdan Dumitru. I wanted to have Bogdan come partially because I think like a lot of people talk about stable coins in this space, and everyone has seen what happens with like programmatic stablecoins in Ethereum. But I'm not sure everyone realizes that like Celo has maintained a programmatic stablecoin peg for the entirety of its life cycle. And this is something that hasn't always been like the forefront of people's minds when they think about Celo. They think about like mission alignment and things like this, but like stablecoins are the entire future of the crypto ecosystem. It's the only thing that the big boys at the top of the government are really, really willing to let us do. So I'd love to discuss specifically, about Mento and what you guys are doing for the stablecoin management, but then let's move that into like, now that Celo is moving to Ethereum, I think there's a lot of potential to specifically just use the stablecoin as the main product of Celo in a lot of ways. And so I'd love to hear about your thoughts about the move to Ethereum and where you guys see yourselves fitting into like this multi-chain ecosystem future.
Awesome, amazing. Yeah, coming back to that first part, like you're right, not a lot of people know about Mento. We've been operating for the last 4 years. We've been maintaining a peg. We haven't went into like the DeFi craziness. Like the TVL in Mento has been pretty low compared to others, but we've been way more focused on real world use cases, actually users. Like we love Impact Market has been here. Like those use cases are important to us. And of course, moving to Ethereum, on Ethereum L2, will open up a lot more in terms of capital control, ways to kind of get value in the Celo ecosystem, ways to grow, and also like bring actual users to Ethereum, because I think we all kind of know the last mile users on Ethereum aren't really there because of fees, because of a lot of reasons. Yeah.
And so part of this approach, from what I've gotten like a high level overview from Merrick on this, but it has something to do with Fiat Connect. And this is something that like I think is a strategy by Celo to really double, triple, quadruple down on getting the most seamless cash in and cash out process for these last mile communities, or for like the global south, if we want to start focusing specifically on that hemisphere, which Celo has a lot of traction in, I think specifically in Brazil even. So we could just use Brazil as the case study. Like, how do you see Mento as a stablecoin evolving?
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I want to zoom out maybe a bit from Brazil, but like the idea of ramps is really interesting. Like, ramps are still kind of this point of connection between the off-chain and on-chain world, which can turn very predatory in a lot of markets. Like, they can still be high fees that end up on the consumer, or they can either become this very weird sort of illegal thing. Like in Nigeria, crypto is still illegal there. Like, you cannot really operate ramps, but you sort of do on a peer-to-peer sort of way.
You should see how sketchy the websites in Nigeria for like off and on ramp look. Like, I texted my friends in Lagos once, like 3 years ago, and I was like, "Is this really what you want me to send you money on?" And they were like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Is this just what the majority of your population is using?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Absolutely not. Like, no." Whatever. And this is like the infrastructure around it still looks super sketchy.
Yeah, and Fiat Connect is awesome for abstracting away RAM providers and creating more of a like democratizable space for wallets to like integrate and choose their provider and be able to quickly switch between them. But I guess there's a deeper layer that we're trying to work on at Mento, which is like, can we actually build tools for people to run their own like meta ramps? So we're building this thing called Mate, which is like a Mento asset transfer engine. And this lets people kind of abstract the idea of, I have fiat in a bank account, I want to move that to a centralized exchange, I want to buy some like high liquidity stable like USDC or USDT or something, then I want to bridge that over to another chain, maybe like sell it for something, and end up with this asset, right? You have these sort of operational steps that are happening, and we're building like an engine that just you can create your own flow and run it. This can enable locals to kind of be their own on-ramp or operate sort of meta on-ramps locally. And this combined with Fiat Connect, I think, can really open up the space and like remove the centralization aspect of ramping a lot.
So essentially with these two in tandem, we have opportunity for people to be like coming from the global south, or maybe UBI projects, right? And they're able to on-ramp their cash into it, but they're also able to off-ramp their cash from a UBI project and or any kind of microfinancing protocol. And this is something that I think a lot of the crypto space has always said, like banking the unbanked and all of these things. And then when they came across the cash issue, the cash in, the cash out, that UX issue, everybody basically was like, yeah, but this isn't fast. I'm not able to like become a millionaire in 24 hours, so I'm not going to focus on this problem. And I think there was a capitalizing on easy problems to solve that had no involvement with regulation or anything like this. But this is where I really commend a lot of the people from the Celo ecosystem, is that it's been a community that's been heads down focused on that. And moving to Ethereum, I'm really hoping that like people in Celo can beat their chest a little bit and like, not be cocky, but at least be strong and proud, right, about this stuff. So I'd love to hear about your thoughts with specifically something like your hopes with regard to Mento entering into the Ethereum ecosystem, and where you see like the Fiat Connect, all of this kind of being bolstered.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, Celo has had a bit of a, has been strong ideologically in the beginning, maybe to its detriment to some extent. Like,
yeah, I think to its detriment.
A sort of weird meme around like empowering everybody. What was it? What was the mission? Sorry.
Prosperity
for all.
Yes.
Which is great. I mean, but like you said, there has been a lot of push in this space that came from Celo. There has been a lot of regulatory push as well. Like, we've been involved with Mika, we've been involved like in all of these like emerging discussions, and I think that's starting to show right now.
And now you're moving to the Ethereum ecosystem, and I think people are realizing that you guys are much more educated on like a lot of these areas than they are, because you've dealt with, you know, the IMF, you've dealt with the World Bank, you've been dealing with actually like full-on nation-state governments for so long, and just people aren't aware of it.
Yeah, and I think like we were talking, lowering this on-ramp costs, making on-ramping a bit more like safe and not as weird. Yeah, will open up, and I think in the Ethereum space particularly, like we still need this like kind of long tail of users, you know, like also in the stable space especially, like there's no focus on local stable coins on Ethereum right now because it just doesn't work for what they're focusing on, because these users can't actually transact, not even on Ethereum L2s. You still have like Polygon, it's like 50 cents a transaction, right? That's still like, there's no L2 for payments on Ethereum right now, realistically.
Micropayments.
Yeah, micropayments, So I think that's where we come, and that's where we can come with also this idea of local stable coins, creating like a stable coin market.
You're saying basically, when you say local stablecoins, you're talking about pools that are like maybe on the layer one, and they collateralize these like maybe more community currencies or individual currencies that are popping up, which is something that I worked with a bunch of people in Lagos for a while, and they were really throwing around this idea of trying to create a stablecoin that was pegged to the price of kilowatts in Lagos, because they have a massive energy deficit. And so 22 million people sharing the power resources for about 9 million people. There's zero regulation on the way that they share power. So if you have a solar panel on your house, you could sell your energy to your neighbor, and there's no regulation on this. And so these Lagosian developers were really trying to focus on trying to create a stablecoin that was pegged to the kilowatts per hour, so that like they could, you know, create essentially a token that would work for them selling the power to people from their homes. And this is something where I think like the people talk about stablecoins, but they're not really talking about the abstraction that stablecoins allow, which is like these community currencies or these like local currencies. So yeah, any plans for an e-Naira on your horizon?
Actually, yeah, we're still figuring out, because you probably know this better than I do, but there's like different exchange rates in practice. Like if you're talking to a dollar to Naira exchange rate, you have like the government set exchange rate, which people can't access. And then you have the black market exchange rates, which is like a 20% haircut most of the time, right? So if you're building a stable coin for this market, what are you actually tracking in the end? Like how do you
actually deal with the conversion?
Yeah, it's like, it's very interesting. And then coming back to the other thing you mentioned, like low volatility assets, or like, you know, more like not stable tokens, but like the price of energy. That's something that we're looking at as well, like having like a consumer price index be a source of savings could be interesting. We actually were researching creating a stable token for the price of energy, but like this is a project that Cody came up with. I don't know if you remember him from...
Oh, Cody, yeah.
Yeah, he's actually launching it on Ethereum, I think. I don't know where he's at now, but...
Shouts out Cody.
Shouts out to Cody and LED. He has this nice idea of deriving the price of energy from the price of Bitcoin and the hash rate, because in a sense, Bitcoin is a proxy for energy now, more than other things. And you can sort of create this index that kind of maps global energy by taking a few things into account.
Taking a few things into account, like the actual power origins, like the energy origins, whether it's like hydroelectric versus coal versus all these different things, because there'd be an index on like how much that energy actually harms the planet, which is the big argument against Bitcoin. That's super interesting, because you could, with relative, you know, liberal interpretation, make an argument for kilowatts, essentially. Well, this is like a good segue into where I would like to see Mento go inside of the Ethereum ecosystem now that Celo's moving over. You have a treasury that is over collateralized 8 times, I believe.
We are 3 now, because during the bear market, we kind of went out of volatile assets into stable, centralized stables to protect our users, basically.
So, like, let's get into this. When you say volatile assets, like, I remember you guys had added some carbon credits, carbon credit tokens, like from Moss, which essentially is just, you know, tokenizing parts of the rainforest, which we won't get into the fact that carbon credit game is entirely a fucking sham, because the only people that can afford to buy whole parts of fucking rainforests are banks. So essentially what we're doing is using the carbon credit movement to allow the banks to buy up all of the forests on the planet, which is never going to go wrong, I'm sure. But yeah, you had Moss tokens in this treasury, which was always a little bit weird, because on the option, if there's a bank run, like how do you liquidate
Yeah,
those types
realistically, that was an experiment. It was like less than 1% of the reserve. It didn't go great. We're unwinding it now, so to speak, and kind of rethinking how we want to do basically treasury management.
Yeah.
There's this, I guess, tension in that between having a decentralized reserve and also having a safe reserve in terms of real-world assets. For a lot of real-world assets, you need an entity a lot of the time to interact with somebody else in order to hold even a tokenized version of that. You still have these KYC constraints.
Yeah.
Like, for example, holding T-bills in Open Eden, you can't just do it. There are a couple of things that are spinning up now, like more decentralized versions of RWAs, but that's still like an emerging thing. So if you want to go for decentralization, you kind of have to give that up.
Explain
in a sense.
RWA real quick.
Real world assets.
Okay, I
like,
just wanted to...
yeah, like tokenized securities, tokenized.
Yeah.
No.
So what you're saying is that there's limited like movements. Is that what you're trying to say here?
Yeah, I guess you have to pick your battles in this field. Like you want to be, if you want to be fully decentralized, you're giving up certain things. Like you can look at Maker's endgame. Like Maker now is the biggest RWA tokenizer in the space. They've went down this route of really segmenting their operations into a lot of sub DAOs. There's like that Maker endgame thing, and they're like sort of focusing centralization in a sense. And I think that's an interesting.
When you focusing like, so you guys, I mean, have an architecture that is managing like a centralized management of a stable coin, but it's also programmatically maintained. And this is something where you guys have seen bank runs, or you've seen like crash days the same as everyone else, and you haven't seen the loss of this peg, which coming into the Ethereum ecosystem, you're going to see a lot more TVL, hopefully, and a lot more volume, you know. So I mean, obviously you've made the treasury a bit more lean, but what, like, from a programmatic side of things, what are you like putting in place to deal with this potential influx?
So from a programmatic side, so I want to actually reclaim algorithmic stable tokens, because I feel like that's been...
Oh, we're calling them algorithmic. We're calling them algorithmic now, people.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's like it's just a word in the end, right? Like we're looking at our stables as being like an abstraction on top of centralized stables that can still give you certain levels of security. Like our reserve now fully collateralizes stables in USDC and DAI. So unless the whole kind of space unwinds, we will never have problems for our stable holders in a sense. And then
that's a real 2007 statement. Like, unless the whole financial market burns.
I mean, yeah. This is where we are, sadly. So it's still like we're still leveraging in a sense risk from centralized actors, right? But we saw USDC, you know, these credit-backed stable tokens. You know, people call them fiat-backed stable tokens, but they're not. USDC is backed by credit. You have money in a bank. If the bank goes away, we saw that with what was that?
Which one?
There was the one
Silvergate.
Silvergate, yeah, where USDC had like 10%. We saw a haircut. They got the money back. Everything resolved. So it's fine, but it's still credit, right? And we're kind of abstracting that as one risk mechanism. We then have volatile assets like Ethereum, Bitcoin, that are giving us, you know, other types of risk, essentially. We have a lot of cellos still. We're still, like, figuring out how to manage that. But, yeah, the idea of this level of abstraction is that we're building on top of different styles of risk and sort of diversifying that a level further.
Different styles of risk is a great term. I think it's one of those things where no one really knows, no one understands how the sausage is made with regards to stable coins, and everyone's just like pretending like they do. So, I mean, from what I'm hoping to see out of Mento inside of the Ethereum ecosystem is a like greater dependence, interdependence. So, for instance, you guys have made a stablecoin that is algorithmic, but it's utilizing a bunch of USDC already as like the collateral backing it. So, how do you get other stablecoin projects to see that putting a basket of stablecoins inside of an algorithmic stablecoin is actually a really great way of securing and shoring up a hyper-utilized or hyper-useful token like CUSD or C-Euro, because of specifically that ability to on-ramp into all those different communities. Like, that's where I'm really excited for the meld of Celo into the Ethereum ecosystem, is that Celo has the actual access to the last mile communities, and they're not beating their chest about it. And this is where it's like there's a lot of arguments being made about like, yes, USDC, you want to see your stuff being used, like let us use it for this, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going into that direction, to be honest, and I think it's not as much about making that apparent in the Ethereum space, because people see it. I mean, even if you look at DAI right now, you know, DAI started as a depth position stablecoin, but since they introduced the peg stability module, it's basically that, you know. They have a one-to-one swapping with all their collateral, diversified collateral, so they're kind of the same mechanism as ours, like it's not created through depth as much.
Yeah.
That's coming. I guess our biggest challenge is really providing the utility in the space against actors like USDT and Tron. Like if you think about that usage in Africa, that's still the king right now.
Tron.
Yeah, Tron with USDT specifically, and those are like two very questionable
That's our
technologies
mission.
put together, right?
Get Justin out of Africa. This is the new mission.
Yes.
Who's funding this?
Yeah, it's unclear, right? But for their use cases, it actually solves them. You know, they're getting it. So yeah, it's up to us to really figure out how to like bring this utility, educate people, and continue to grow there.
Nice.
And partnerships like the one we just had with Opera are like a good gateway to this, because we're seeing all these like bigger institutionals really coming on board and coming out of the weeds now.
And they're looking towards the stablecoin teams that are the most familiar with regulators.
Yeah, and also on the chains where they can actually operate practically.
Yeah, especially with Opera's mobile browser. Yeah, I see what you're saying. All right, well, Bogdan, I wish you the best of luck, and I intend to be an avid supporter. And I just really think that it's important that as we're going to have these conversations around internet resiliency, around UBI, and around like everything that crypto is going to do, we should be really cognizant of the fact that like crypto has done very little so far, and most of what crypto has actually done for the world has been based on stable coins, and like stable coins as a product is really what we have to offer the world right now. And so I think it's really important to understand like how they're made, how it's all actually coming into fruition, and where it's headed. So I really appreciate you coming through. If there's any like last moment thoughts you want to leave anyone with around stablecoin ecosystem and where it's headed.
I'm super excited about just identity also becoming a thing. Yeah. Because I think that will help us really unlock a lot, especially with like impact markets, microfinance. I think getting those reputation networks and identity happening will work very well for the stablecoin space. Yeah, I think that everyone's circling the DID world, and we're all trying to find an ethical way of doing it and how to create equitable solutions. But and privacy is a big problem, right? Huge problem that we still have in the payment space. Like I know we have all these ideas around privacy pools and association sets. Like all these things coming together, I think is important now. Yeah. All right, Bogdan. Thank you so much. And with that, all right. Whoop. With that, we're bringing the real world stage to a close. This has been Conversations with Jarrell. But this has been a focus on stuff from people who are focused on actual real world solutions. That's honestly what it is. I think we're calling this event Dreamworld because that's what a lot of Ethereum and crypto is. And then there's a lot of dreaming without necessarily calibrated focus. So this has been a smorgasbord of people with calibrated focus. And thank you for joining us. Bye.